About 50 years ago, psychics began to appear in the Republic of Korea. At a time when people did not yet have knowledge of such a phenomenon, they were perceived as something strange. Through numerous experiments and studies, psychic abilities began to be gradually recognized, and already in this century, a personnel system was created. The system was intended to register psychics as people with special talents. With its help, specialization took place, and they were assigned to perform special tasks. Among a number of places involved in managing special talent was a government-supported company, Special Human Resources Management Corporation, SHRA. Normally, for a person like the main character, it would be impossible to contact such a company, but in the process of preparing for work, the guy's professor. I offered him to work a little at SHRA. The main character, walking towards the office, saw an attractive guy. As it later turned out, he was his student. As soon as the guys met, Sol Hoen began teaching a lesson on Korean history. Unexpectedly, Kwon Mun-seong decided to ask Ho-young if he had psychic abilities. But the teacher only replied that he would not teach other people if he had even a drop of the gift. In fact, Hoen had been very nervous ever since he decided to join SHRA. The main character had a secret. From childhood, he hid the fact that he had psychic abilities. As soon as Munson saw Hoen and the light that came from his chest, the guy immediately felt a certain kinship in the main character. The fact that he is the same as the guy. The guy didn't understand who the main character really was. During the next lesson, Munson asked Hoen to teach him how to kiss, which greatly surprised the main character. But suddenly the teacher woke up without kissing the guy in his dream. Munson turned out to be an employee of the SHRA company, in which he was called a ghost. Since the guy there did not give a clear answer to his question, he decided to go to Hoen himself and ask if he had at least some abilities. As soon as Director Kong wanted to make a deal, a sign burst into the room and did not let the deal happen. As soon as the guards wanted to attack him, he immediately removed them all with a spear. From that very day onwards, along with sleep, Hoen's psychic abilities often began to spin out of control. Now he is constantly afraid of breaking something when he is outside the house. During the lesson, Hoen took blocking medications that he had taken in the past. Munson looked at the teacher all the time and did not even listen to him because he had recently learned that psychic abilities can be obtained from another person by touch. As soon as Hoen wanted to leave the office, Munson stopped him, and touching the teacher's hand, everything around began to explode and break. After it was all over, the main character ran away. That day, when Hoen left the company building as if he was running away from there, he was walking home wondering what he should do now and what to do with all this. And suddenly, he received a call from Munson, which greatly surprised the teacher. Over the phone, Munson asked Hoen for forgiveness for what recently happened in the classroom. The guy promised that by the next class he would find out what happened. Surprisingly, after that incident, Hoen's abilities, which had gotten out of control, somehow calmed down on their own. But the problem was different. The teacher continued to have erotic dreams with the participation of Munson. Even while meeting with friends, Hoyeon continued to think about Munseong without even listening to his friends. Meanwhile, the guy was preparing the same dish that the main character remembered. While drinking, Hoen remembered his neighbor. Since it was a long time ago, the memories flew out of his head. In fact, for a boy of that time, this was a rather vivid and unforgettable acquaintance. 18 years ago, when Hoen was 9 years old, he was sitting in front of the door waiting for his mother because he had lost his house keys and couldn't get in. Suddenly, a neighbor saw him and invited him to eat and wait for his mother. Now that Hoen remembered it, he thought it would be okay if his neighbor whipped up something simple, or alternatively, he could make instant ramen. Hoen remembered that his neighbor had been banging and rattling dishes in the kitchen for a long time and then served the guy home-cooked food that he had prepared himself. Since the main character was the only one in the family and he was raised by his mother, he was very awkward. Remembering his childhood, Hoen remembered that he often lingered at that neighbor's door with the thought that maybe they could bump into each other again. But in the end, their second meeting never took place. While Hoen was sitting and thinking about the past, Munson suddenly came out of the wall, which greatly frightened the main character. It turned out that the guy has a superpower, passing through objects. It turned out that Munson was late due to the fact that he was on a mission, but he told Hoenn that his phone was dead and he needed to change clothes, since he could not tell the truth. The guy noticed that the light inside the teacher appeared and disappeared. After class, Munson decided to give Hoenn a ride home. Already in the car, the main character noticed the same tattoo on the guy's hand as on his neighbor's hand from his childhood. Hoenn's abilities appeared at the age of 9. His superpower was a force wave. Since the main character could not control her, everyone at school and even at home was afraid of him. The teacher decided to ask the guy how he knew about his abilities, and he admitted what he did to the teacher. Suddenly, during the conversation, Hoenn realized that that same neighbor was Munson. It turned out that due to one incident, the guy found himself from the past to the future, and due to the consequences, his memories are very fragmentary. It was really only once that Hoenn met his neighbor. That Ajushi never showed up again, no matter how long the guy waited, and it was impossible to get to know him better. About a month later, Hoenn finally heard news about his neighbor. He heard the news from the owner of the house, as she was talking near the door of the guy's apartment. The owner and the man were discussing the fact that the neighbor just took it and suddenly disappeared. In fact, Munson lied to Hoenn. It turned out that the guy died due to an accident. And 10 years later, he came to life again. This greatly frightened his parents and relatives. Munson remembered the day he died. It happened 20 years ago, but for the guy 2 years ago. The guy had a younger brother, whom the guy himself sent to study at the university and paid for his studies in full. It turned out that the guy's younger brother did not study at all, but only drank and had fun. When the next year the boy said that he was going to serve, the guy was beside himself with joy. When Hoenn was already lying in bed at home, Munson unexpectedly called him and said that he would drive up to the teacher's house to give him some toast that he had forgotten in the car. It turned out that the toast was the headphone case. As soon as Munson was about to leave, Hoenn stopped him and suggested they have dinner together. The guys went to a place where they could drink and eat delicious food. The main character invited the guy to talk to him informally, and the guy did so. Unexpectedly, the main character decided to ask Munson if he had a girlfriend, but the guy only replied that he didn't have one. The guy decided to offer the main character a job at Shura. When the guys were returning home, Hoenn drank heavily, so Munson decided to help him get home and took his arm. As soon as the guy took the main character home, then he asked him to stay a little longer. Suddenly, Hoyoung reached out and kissed Munseong on the cheek, and he immediately walked right through him and fell headfirst on the table. When the guy picked him up, the main character's forehead was broken and he was unconscious. As soon as Hoenn opened his eyes, he realized that he was in an apartment from the past. When he walked into the living room, he saw Moonsung sleeping on the sofa. As soon as Munson woke up, he immediately called Hoenn to come to him. The guys immediately kissed and moved on to a deeper process. But the main character immediately woke up, and it turned out that it was all a dream. When Hoenn checked his phone, he found an incoming message from Munson that looked like a death sentence. It said that the guy was forced to reschedule their lesson until next time. Hoenn spent 2 hours trying to write a response to Munson. He typed the text and erased it again, and then finally sent an apology message. The teacher then spent the rest of the day in despair, lamenting that he needed to hurry up and find a new job. The next day, when Munson was on a mission, his colleague was surprised that the guy was so obedient. Suddenly, the guy saw the doctor's photo and remembered everything he did to him. As soon as Munson left the office, he began to wonder if the doctors who killed him were still alive. But unexpectedly, the guy met Hoenn. It turned out that the main character came to work part-time at the clinic where the guy had a mission. While the guys were talking, Moonsung took off his mask in front of Hoenn, which is why Director Kang immediately noticed him. Suddenly, a nurse approached the guys and took out a stun gun. The nurse quietly hit Hoenn with a stun gun, causing Munson to also fall under it. But the guy immediately hit the director, picked up the main character and began to run away. On the way to his destination, the teacher came to his senses and began to get nervous. As soon as the guys ran out of the building, Munson pushed Hoenn into the car with his colleague, and then suddenly the guy was shot in the shoulder. But he was in no hurry to get into the car, but only ordered the guys to get out immediately. In the car itself, Hoenn began to rage and ask the driver to stop because Munson remained there. But it turned out that the guy managed to move into the car since he had the ability, and therefore the main character calmed down. Munsung woke up from the fact that he was dreaming about his past. As soon as he went to the window, he saw that Hoenn was sleeping next to him on the sofa, which greatly surprised the guy. Munson began to look at the guy's face and noticed that the main character did not carefully monitor the wound, and therefore a scar appeared there. Suddenly, Hoenn opened his eyes and was very scared, as he was again having an erotic dream. 4 hours ago, Hoenn was being reassured by Munson's colleague. Unexpectedly, the guy decided to find out the relationship between the main character and the ghost, because rescuing the teacher looked a little suspicious. While the guys were talking, Hoenn decided to speak out to Munson, but he immediately stood up, and as soon as he wanted to leave, the guy stopped him and began to explain why he did this. As soon as Munson wanted to say what really happened to him, Hyun Tae-sok unexpectedly came into the guy's room and asked Ho-young to leave the room, as they needed to discuss something important. Tae-sok began to scold Moonsong for becoming a shield for Ho-young. The next day, the main character woke up from the fact that someone was sitting on his feet. When he opened his eyes, he saw the guy's colleague. The guys went to Hoenn's house because during all this time, something could have happened there. As soon as the main character entered the house, he saw a mess there and a bunch of things scattered on the floor. After Munson was discharged from the hospital, he asked Hoenn to move in with him, since at the moment it was the safest place. The main character couldn't even believe himself that he would ever end up in the guy's house. Hoenn moved to Munsong because the protagonist's address had already fallen into the hands of a bad company. A little later, the guys decided to go to the store together, since the guy had no groceries at home. For lunch, Hoyeon decided to make ramen, since it turned out that Moonsong had never tried it. As soon as the guy tried it a little, he was very surprised that the main character really cooks it very tasty. Munson decided to ask Hoenn to resume their history classes again. The main character was shocked because he thought that the guy wouldn't want to deal with him anymore after the day he got drunk. Unexpectedly, Hoenn woke up in the middle of the night and began to remember where he and Munson had stopped, and in the end, he fell asleep at the table. When the guy woke up, it was already 10:30 in the morning. It turned out that Munson did not wake up Hoenn because he was sleeping too soundly. The main character did not understand why the guy continued to show kindness to him. While Munsung was training, Taewon came to him and suggested that the guy rest a little more due to his recent injury. After that, he invited the guy to go with him and have a little drink. Late in the evening, Ho-young was waiting for Munseong. But when the front door opened, Taewon dragged the drunken guy into the apartment, which greatly surprised the main character. As soon as Hoenn wanted to change Munson's clothes, the guy immediately stood up and hugged the main character tightly. The teacher didn't understand why he did it, but he reached out and kissed the guy who was crying in his sleep. Ho-young kissed Munseong because he had a strong desire to make the guy wake up from his sad dream, and suddenly the guy woke up and kissed him back. As soon as Munson woke up, he was very surprised that he slept in the same bed with Hoenn. The main character decided to go to the kitchen and make the guy hangover soup, since he had a bad headache. As soon as Hoenn remembered the events of last night, Munson immediately came out to him in his shorts and asked to talk. But the main character ran away from him and asked the guy to go to the shower and swim. Suddenly, Munson remembered that the boy who lived next door to him, who sat in front of the door, whom the guy looked after all day, was Hoenn. The guy realized that it was then that a connection was established between them. Munson couldn't believe that he slept with Hoenn. When he came out of the shower, the main character was already in full swing preparing the hangover soup. When the teacher set the table, the guy admitted that he remembered the past. Suddenly, Munson began to say that he regretted that he had decided to take the guy home with him for the day. This made Hoenn very angry, and immediately a call to the guy's phone came from the room. As soon as Munsong wanted to apologize for yesterday, Hoyeon exploded. He asked the guy not to take responsibility anymore, because otherwise, the main character would feel pathetic. Hoenn admitted everything, both his erotic dreams and the fact that he was the first to kiss Munson that night. And then suddenly, a power wave flew out of the guy, which injured the guy's cheek. A little later, when Munson came to his colleagues, He said that he had injured his cheek on a fragment of a plate. A little earlier, the guy admitted to Hoenn that he was not disgusted by his kiss at night. Munson admitted to his colleagues that they confessed their feelings to him, but he refused. And the guy realized that he was playing with Hoenn's heart. That day, the guys were never able to talk properly about what happened. When Hoenn treated Munsong's wound, he asked the guy to start dating him, but the guy only replied that they wouldn't succeed. The guy said that he was just an adult who once treated the main character well. At that moment, Hoenn had a lot of words on his tongue, since the main character was not mistaken. For him, the guy is not just someone from the old days, but part of the protagonist's reality. Ho-young wondered if he started dating some girl, would Munsong even care? The main character admitted that the guy deprived him of his ordinary life. Over the next few days, Hoenn tried not to cross paths with Munson often. Perhaps the guy understood everything, since he was constantly going somewhere and was away from home for long periods of time. As soon as Munsong woke up, Taiwan immediately came running to him, who explained to the guy that all his friends had died because of the doctor's betrayal, and therefore the guys were left with just the two of them to live. When Munson saw a photo of his younger brother looking at him from a photograph where he was already a matured young man, the guy fully realized that he was lost in time. Wanting to alleviate at least a little the feeling of loneliness and helplessness from being literally thrown into an unfamiliar world, Munson wanted to tell someone his story, and for these people to also tell about him what they knew. Munson began to look for the phone numbers of his acquaintances and people with whom he studied together in the stored graduation albums. But the glances they cast towards the guy, they looked at him as if the guy was not a person, but something abnormal. As soon as Munson came home, Hoenn was not there, and the guy did not believe that his house had always been so quiet and lonely. As soon as the main character woke up, it turned out that he had been kidnapped by Director Khan. It turned out that when the guy was standing in front of the building of the company where Munson worked, he was attacked from behind and something was injected into his neck, from which he instantly passed out. Director Kang told Ho-young that Munsong used to be part of Soram's company alone 18 years ago, but at some point all the team members died due to some circumstances. Only Munsong and Taesok were left alive from that team. It turned out that the guys who kidnapped the main character hacked the database of the Shotrei company, and from there, they learned that the main character had worked there for a short time. Munson continued to toss and turn in bed. He didn't know what to write to Hoenn, but suddenly, he received a message with his destination. Meanwhile, the main character began to be beaten because he did not want to say anything about the guy. Hoenn didn't know what to do. He wanted to use his superpower to hit the director with some object, but he wasn't sure it would work. Hoenn needed to first test whether his superpower worked on people, since he had never done this before. While the director was smoking, Munson appeared. Director Kang offered Munsong a deal. If he gets into the car and goes to the man who wants to kill him, he will let Hoenn go. But the main character immediately began to dissuade the guy from doing this. As soon as Munson was brought to his knees and his hands were cuffed, Hoenn exploded and released a force wave at Director Kang. This gave time for the guy to throw off the handcuffs and attack the man. Suddenly, Hoenn's power was out of control. His head was buzzing and his temples were hurting. He mentally asked at least someone to help him. Munson didn't know how to calm him down, so he kissed the main character. When Hoenn woke up, he realized that he was in a hospital room. Mr. Yangshin brought him up to date and explained what exactly happened. Yangshin's words, of course, led the guy into a dead end, sounding very ambiguous, but in any case, now he and Munson are safe. But the main character never saw the guy during his entire stay in the hospital. Hoenn thought that Munsong was too busy. Since they ended up getting into another altercation, the situation was clearly not out of the ordinary. Then the main character really didn't know how it would all end. Suddenly there was a knock on Hoenn's room. He thought that this was the person in charge of the company, but Munson entered the room. The guy admitted that he wants to keep the main character and that he likes him. Then the guys started dating in the ward, but it didn't get to the point, and when the guys got home, Hoenn attacked Munson because he had endured it for a long time. It turned out that Munson then survived only thanks to the blood that was poured into him in place of his own. It was she who allowed him to physically stay alive, but his consciousness never returned. When Hoenn was still little, Munson was a member of a group of people with superpowers. Since their base was in the Sorum area, their group was also called Sorum 1. The Sorum group was brought together by one doctor, who looked after and monitored all the guys, everyone's condition, as a responsible attending physician. He told the guys in detail about their abilities. But one day, 7 years later, all members of the group were killed with the words, "Everything I wanted, I got from you," and the already deceased Munson, for some reason, suddenly woke up 18 years later in a place he had never seen before. When Moonsong woke up, he couldn't even move, and then local residents found him and took him to the hospital. Fortunately, they managed to contact his then-colleague, Taesok. As it turned out later, the real purpose of forming the Sorum 1 group was nothing more than an experiment to create raw materials for the elixir of immortality from the blood of people who had superpowers. Having heard the information about Sorum 1, Munson could not believe his ears. Because his memory was a complete mess. He did not even remember how and why he died. But now he certainly won't forget anything. As soon as Jae-sung arrived at the company, it was only a week later that they were able to find the girl who hacked their database. It turned out that the girl had already been caught and was being interrogated. A little later, Hoen's tutoring contract came to an end. But he came to Shra to take a test to identify his psychic abilities. In fact, the main character wanted to ask the guy to go with him, but the guy left early in the morning. That evening, when Hoen wanted to join the Shatre company, Munson was completely against it. Since he claimed that this was only his fight, he decided to convince the main character by reminding him of the feeling when he uses force in public. As soon as Hoen was lost in his thoughts, Mr. Yu immediately brought him to his senses. He invited the main character to check. Meanwhile, the guys did not succeed in interrogating the girl, since she did not want to say anything. A little earlier, Hoen was confirmed to have psychic abilities. On the way home, Munson did not understand how to properly treat the main character. As soon as Munson came home, Hoen immediately prepared dinner for him. The main character admitted that he had passed the ability tests in the company, but it turned out that the guy was in the know, since he himself had passed the same test. At the training center, Hoen was put on an earpiece and bracelets, and then led into a room where he had to show his strength. The main character arranged all the things around him and released his power outward, which greatly shocked Mr. Yu.